I stood outside his office with my son asleep in my arms, and the sound behind that door broke me, then built me a plan. The hallway was too quiet. Thick carpet, frosted glass walls. My reflection barely visible, like I was already fading out of my own life. My son's breath was warm against my shoulder, soft and steady, trusting. And then I heard it, muffled laughter. Not the kind you share with coworkers, not polite, not professional, a woman's laugh, light, careless, followed by my husband's voice, low and familiar, saying a name he had never once spoken in our home, a name that didn't belong in his mouth. I froze. My hand hovered inches from the door handle. I could smell his cologne seeping through the crack, the same one he wore on our anniversary. Time slowed. The laughter came again. Papers shuffled, a chair scraped closer, and in that moment, the life I thought I had collapsed without a single word being spoken to me. What I did next cost him everything he thought protected him. Just hours earlier, I had been floating. I had won $50 million. $50 million. I remember shaking so hard I had to sit on the kitchen floor. I remember laughing, crying, calling his name, thinking this was the moment our struggles ended. I rushed to his office with our son because I wanted him to be the first to know, because I believed we were a team. That belief died in that hallway. I stood there with all that money suddenly feeling useless, cold, heavy, because betrayal doesn't hurt less when you're rich. It hurts sharper, clearer. It tells you exactly who you married. In that moment, I understood the stakes. I could scream. I could confront him. I could ruin everything in public and walk away empty inside, or I could be quiet. I could choose my line. Not cruelty, not chaos, but justice. The kind that leaves no room for lies, the kind that makes the truth unavoidable. If you've ever been backstabbed by those closest to you and fantasized about the perfect revenge, like subscribe and comment your own story below, this one's going to hit hard. I stepped back from the door. The laughter echoed once more, careless and cruel. The smell of cologne followed me down the hallway as I turned away, my son still asleep, unaware that his mother had just crossed a line she could never uncross, and that everything was about to change. We had a house full of the little things that make a life feel like yours. A crooked framed photo of the three of us from a rainy Saturday at the pier, my son's crayon drawings taped to the fridge like tiny flags of triumph. The chipped mug I always used for coffee because the chip felt like home. Those ordinary objects were the scaffolding of my faith in us. I could stand in our kitchen in the blue hour before anyone was awake and name every sound. The refrigerator's soft hum, my son's shallow breathing from his room, the kettle clicking to life when I put it on. Morning smelled like coffee and laundry and the faint, sweet tang of baby shampoo. It smelled like safety. We had rituals. Saturday pancakes with extra syrup, our mutual, ridiculous decision that we would never hire a babysitter for family nights. The way he would stand in the doorway after I put our son to bed and pretend to read my face. He would say, half joking, "We always said money would never change us." I said it back. I believed him. Maybe too easily. Maybe because I wanted myself to be the kind of person who believed in that promise. Winning $50 million was like being struck by light. It wasn't flashy at first, a call, a number read aloud on the other end of the line. Then the world tilting in the most ridiculous way. For a moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I remember dropping onto the kitchen floor because my legs forgot how to hold me up. The tile was cold and solid and absurdly real beneath my palms. I remember the sound of the paper as I signed the acceptance forms, the rustle like leaves. It felt like a new beginning wrapped in tissue paper and impossible possibility. When I told him, he hugged me like a man hearing music for the first time. He picked up our son and spun him around the living room while confetti from a cheap can bounced harmlessly off the ceiling. Champagne popped. My heartbeat went loud in my ears, a staccato drum that matched the laughter in the air. "We can finally breathe," I said. "Let's take that trip we always promised. Let's fix the roof, start that school fund, buy that ugly painting you like." I promised him something small. I promised him the kind of normal that feels like victory. A new roof, a longer vacation, a private moment where I could look at him and mean every single word when I said I trusted him. He wore his halo well in public. At charity dinners, he was easy, a wide smile, a hand on my back like a punctuation mark to the sentences I was proud to be part of. He knew faces. He knew the right way to laugh at a joke and the right way to steer a conversation towards someone else so they would feel seen. People complimented him quietly. He's a family man, as if that were a rare and valuable species. He shone under those lights, polished and warm, the kind of man who made you feel lucky to be standing beside him. At home, the shine dulled in the smallest ways. The missed anniversaries at first were convenient, explained by meetings that supposedly ran late or a client who had suddenly withdrawn. The evasive text messages I noticed only because he left his phone face up on the coffee table and the screen lit up with a name I'd never seen. Sorry, baby, traffic was terrible became I forgot became I'll make it up to you. His half apologies were a pattern, not a promise. His tone softened into something that, over time, felt rehearsed. I excused him sometimes. I forgave him sometimes. That was part of the life we had built, layers of small lets and small forgivings. But small things build into architecture, a strange receipt piled into memory like dust, a lunch I didn't recognize, a boutique I had never heard him mention. A calendar entry showed up on his work account. Client lunch, 1 p.m. confirmed, with a name that didn't belong to anyone we knew. Once, at a holiday gathering, I watched him across the room as someone leaned in and whispered something that made him laugh in that way he used to laugh with me. He returned to my side with a shrug and said, "They're just old friends." And I told myself that was enough. Doubt is subtle. It starts as a pinprick. The first time the pin pierced me, I barely noticed. I told myself it was paranoia, a mood. I told myself that 50 million would fix the holes I'd been pretending weren't there. Money, I believed, had a way of setting things straight, but doubt is clever. It finds a way to make you see the same face with new eyes. It makes a name on a screen look like a door you never knew you could open, eh? One afternoon, I found a receipt in the pocket of a jacket he had left on the chair. It was the kind of thing you toss in a drawer and forget, but that day I was tired of forgetting. The receipt was small, folded, the corner soft from being tucked away. It was for a boutique downtown. The name embossed on it was unfamiliar. My thumb traced the letters and I felt my chest contract like a fist. I told myself the most rational thing, that men have lunches, that business is full of women who are colleagues and friends. I told myself to breathe. I told myself not to make mountains out of a folded quarter of paper. Then there was the calendar entry. I saw it weeks later when I was using his laptop to search for something trivial, a recipe for the pancakes we like to make on Saturdays. It flashed on the screen like a mistake. 4 p.m., meeting with A. Office. A short notation next to it, confirm with R being a name that was not mine. I felt the room tilt. I closed the laptop like I had flicked off a light and told myself I had imagined it. I told myself that reading into these things was a kind of cruelty. Then I read the entry again because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I read it until the letters bled into each other and the name became a chant. I tried to catch him in ordinary moments. I asked him once, casually, "Who is R?" as if it were a question about weather. He gave me one of those half smiles that have an empire of things behind them and said, "Someone from the office, you don't need to worry about it." He brushed his hand across my cheek the way he used to, but his touch was distracted. A film over the old warmth. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to keep the scaffolding intact. But the scaffold had a worm in it somewhere. There were other signals that kept slipping into my life like stones into a shoe. A colleague of his, the kind who'd always been polite to guests at our parties, seemed to avoid my eyes the week after the winning announcement. At a small work gathering, she lingered when my husband left the room and said something to a man who looked at me too long, like I was a mirror with a missing piece. Small, stupid things, but they added up. The cracks were not dramatic. They were the steady drip that hollows out a stone. My inner voice began to mutter like a radio in another room, background noise that grew louder until I could not ignore it. What if? What if? What if? What if? The questions multiplied. The more I tried to quiet them, the louder they became. I found myself replaying the laugh I had heard in the hallway, listening for other notes, other betrayals. I tasted iron sometimes for no reason and thought it was grief. It was not grief. It was knowledge coming like a physical thing into my mouth. I started keeping things, not because I was planning anything, but because I felt myself waking up from a kind of trust-induced sleep. A card, a printout of an email accidentally saved. A text I somehow screenshot without meaning to. I'd tell myself that collecting these crumbs was not grand, not dramatic, just prudence. But prudence has a sharp edge when it's driven by fear. There was a night I couldn't sleep. The house creaked, the old pipes sighing like tired lungs. I sat on the back steps and watched the stars decide whether to burn themselves out in silence. My son snored in his room, small, unbothered, and the sight of him filled me with an ache I had no vocabulary for. How do you protect someone from the slow erosion of your world? How do you keep a child safe when the person who built the walls around you is eroding from the inside? I allowed myself, finally, to put words to the ache. Betrayal is not a single arrow. It is a series of little decisions that add up to an outcome. It is the habit of choosing someone else's interest over your shared promises. It is the soft things that become hard, the excuses that stack like stones until they become a wall. I remember standing in the hallway outside his office one more time, a week after I'd first noticed the receipt, but before the lottery wind had blown into our lives. I had been thinking of leaving a note on his car windshield about the anniversary he'd missed. Small, petty revenge. Now it felt like a child's solution. The name on the calendar gnawed at me. The receipt did not fit into my idea of us. The way he laughed in that other woman's presence did not belong to my husband. I felt something shift inside me. Not a plan, not yet, but the stirrings of one. I wanted to be the kind of person who trusted the man I loved, but I wanted more, to be the kind of person who would not allow her child's life to be built on half-truths. The money we had won made the decision both easier and harder. Easier because I no longer feared poverty. Harder because with so much at stake, the right course to take demanded more precision and less fury. So I decided, in the quiet of that morning, that I would stop by his office unannounced. Not to yell, not to make a scene, though my heart wanted that a little for the release. I wanted to see, I wanted to listen. I wanted to know if the things that had begun to whisper in my life were real. I told myself it was curiosity, practical and clean. I told myself I would walk in, say hello, and we would laugh about it. I told myself it would be a small, harmless check. And that is how the right kind of trouble begins, with the best intentions. The elevator hummed like a throat clearing itself. The doors sighed open, and I stepped out into that thin, fluorescent light that always made office hallways look like the inside of a watch, precise, relentless, unforgiving. My son slept in his stroller, his hair falling soft against the blanket. A slow, ordinary rhythm I could have anchored my whole life to. I gripped the stroller with one hand, the strap of my bag with the other, and tried, absurdly, to steady myself by counting tile squares as if geometry could hold my nerves in place. The carpet muffled my footsteps. It swallowed sound the way old houses swallow secrets. There were framed certificates and tasteful abstract art along the walls, calming, neutral, designed not to startle. I breathed in. It hit me then. His cologne. Sharp, familiar, a scent I had associated with so many ordinary kindnesses. An arm around my shoulder at a premiere. A sudden, warm presence next to me in a crowded room. Today, it felt like a signpost leading somewhere I didn't want to go. There was a hum from somewhere. Air conditioning, fluorescent lights, the distant buzz of someone on a headset, office noise, ordinary life, and the laughter. I heard it before I saw the door, a bright, careless sound that cut through the hum like a pair of scissors through silk. A woman's laugh. Not loud. Not a shout, but too light for a business meeting, too intimate for the open-plan sensibility of the space. It made the hairs on my arms lift. My hand found the brass knob like it always did, the learned mechanics of being a wife who trusted. The metal was warm from the office heat. My fingers hovered. I could have turned it. I could have thrown the door open and announced myself with a ridiculous, performative rage. I imagined the scene like a movie. The door swept wide, my son flung into cushions, accusations fired like confetti. I imagined the satisfying cinematic moment when the guilty man drops his fork and the room goes silent. My heart began to beat against my ribs in a fast, almost allergic rhythm, but the laugh kept going. That laugh had the wrong orbit. My name did not sit in it. His voice threaded through it, low, casual, with that easy cadence he always used when he wanted to seem unburdened. There was a name muttered like a passcode. I could not catch it whole. Only the edges. A consonant. A soft vowel. A syllable that did not belong to our kitchen, to our bed, to the way we used each other's names. It felt like a betrayal pronounced in shorthand. Fragments reached me. "We'll handle it." A clipped response that promised exclusion. "Won't even know," someone saying, the voice almost amused. A chair scraped, paper shuffled. The woman laughed again, light, unconcerned. Then a softer word that might have been my husband's voice. Perfect. That single word landed like a stone. My hands went numb. I wanted to run. I wanted to tear that door off. Short sentence. It was sharp enough to cut through the fog. My breath came shallow. For a breath, I thought I would faint. I leaned against the wall and felt the cheap vinyl under my palm, grounding me in a small, unpleasant way. The stroller rocked a fraction. My son murmured in his sleep, and for a second the ordinary rhythm steadied me. The thing I was trying to protect, moving on oblivious to my storm. I rose from the wall. I moved like someone in a shallow pool, resistance all around. The human body has a funny memory for small things. The angle of a doorknob, the particular squeak of a hinge, the way a voice sounds muffled through glass. I raised my hand and knocked. Not hard. Civil. A sound meant for colleagues and appointments. A polite knock, like dropping a pebble into a still pond. There was a pause. Footsteps. Quick and businesslike, the rustle of a jacket. A voice that wasn't his called, "Sam, you okay?" Light, cheery, the tonal equivalent of a smile. My husband's laugh. Smooth, practiced. A reply that trimmed itself, professional. Then the door opened a crack and a woman in a blazer skimmed past, smiling at me as if she saw a familiar face in the lobby. "Hey, are you looking for him?" she asked, voice bright. She had that way of speaking that suggested small talk was an architectural necessity. She glanced at the stroller and then up at me. Something about the normality of her smile made the betrayal sting sharper. The office had reasserted itself. Protocol, politeness, the polite fences people raise to maintain the public self. Her face did not show the private ledger of their conversation it had been part of. She didn't know. None of them knew, which meant the entire apparatus of our days was built on selective truths. My husband stepped out next, the ease of his movement like a practiced rhythm. He greeted the woman with the same smile he reserved for client dinners and award nights. He saw me. His expression flickered, surprise, then something like an attempt at composure. He straightened his tie, the soldier-like gesture of a man who believed appearances could rewrite truth. "Hey," he said. The syllable was small, careful, like a person trying not to shatter anything around them. "What are you doing here?" "Just came to say hi," I said. My voice felt like someone else's, thin. A thread stretched too tight. "Thought I'd surprise you." I forced a laugh because that's what good wives did in unexpected corridors. They made spontaneity look charming, not catastrophic. He smiled. Too smooth. "Nice surprise." His eyes flicked to the stroller, nominal concern on his face. "You okay? Coffee?" I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to ask, "Who is she?" I wanted to demand the name he had not said in our home. Instead, I smiled back and let the starch of the office air press its neat lines into our conversation. We said the ordinary things. "How's the morning?" "Busy." "See you tonight," as if our whole life could be negotiated in bullet points. The woman, her name on the door would always be a blank in my mind now, tilted her head like someone inviting an overlapped memory. She asked a question to my husband, something casual about the merger committee. His answer was clipped, professional. He leaned in to whisper something we could not hear, a movement I saw as clearly as if someone had written it across the ceiling. He laughed. Light, casual. I felt a weight in my chest, not so much from the laugh, but from the meaning the laugh had gained. I stepped back. The hallway's fluorescent lights made the skin of my hands look pallid, almost translucent. I felt as if the world had filled with a high, thin glass that separated me from the laughter. Someone's phone chimed. A bright, bright sound. A distant elevator ding. The office returned to its rhythm. The normalcy was a slap. My mind did not work in stories anymore. It worked in facts. Names, times, receipts, snippets of conversation. The woman's laugh, his perfect, the calendar entries, the receipts tucked into a jacket pocket. Each one was a small stone. Together, they were a dam. I reached into my bag and fumbled for my phone without thinking. I recorded. Not a full cinematic capture, not an overt confrontation. My thumb hovered, then pressed. The phone was a little steady anchor. It vibrated softly in my palm like a heartbeat. I angled it, careful to be discreet. Just the edge of the door, the way his lips moved, the cadence of the laughter. The screen recorded sound in a flat, unremarkable way, flattening the texture of the moment into data. I watched the little red dot in the corner as if it were a metronome for the truth. Then, I did something else I hadn't planned. I reached into the pocket of his blazer that hung on the back of a chair near the reception desk. My fingers found a paper folded small. It was a receipt, crease soft from being tucked away. I should not have been there in that public intimacy, sifting through the remnants of his day. But some part of me had been collecting evidence for months. Screenshots on my phone, stray emails saved, fleeting receipts. Now, my hands moved with the force of habit and fear. The names printed on that little slip felt like nails hammered into an idea. I smoothed it out and saw the boutique's name, the amount. The date, last Wednesday. I breathed. I tucked it back into my pocket like one might hide a small wound, hoping it would stop bleeding if not noticed. Short sentences again. They are useful when the world tightens. His smile faltered for the first time. Maybe he noticed my hand in his jacket. Maybe he saw the tip of the receipt. Maybe he felt a change in the air, the way a sailor feels a storm in the barometric pressure in his bones. He glanced at me differently then. An attempt at chastisement, a silent admonition. His lips tightened. He tried to reclaim the ordinary. Everything okay? Are you sure you should be here with him? I looked at him. I looked at the woman who had passed me as if we were both attendees at a play where I had missed the opening act. The woman's eyes darted away, polite concern and something like a practiced oblivion. She asked if she could get me anything. Her politeness was a shield. It made me angrier than the laughter. I left, but not before I took one more small piece. A name, whispered in passing at the reception desk. Someone pointed to a folder and said, "Ask R about the file." It was enough. I left the office with my son, the stroller wheels whispering over the carpet, my hands full of small, accumulated paper truths. The elevator doors closed, and the hum swallowed us again. Outside, the city smelled of rain that had not come and of coffee from a nearby cart. The ordinary world had resumed its arms. People held umbrellas, dogs tugged at leashes, phones buzzed. I stepped into that chorus like someone trying to find the right note in a chord that had been broken by a single, sour string. I did not shout. I did not charge back. I had the recording, the receipt, the weight of a name. That was not enough for closure, maybe not even for confrontation. But it was enough to start. Enough to begin assembling the architecture of truth. Enough to begin planning. As we rolled down the sidewalk, my son's small hand curled in sleep, and for a moment I held him closer. He smelled like milk and clean shampoo and the soft cotton of his blanket. I felt a fierce, uncomplicated love surge through me, sharp as a blade, but not the cutting kind. It was the kind that steadied me, that made clarity possible instead of chaos. My phone was warm in my pocket. The recording file blinked as if it were alive, a small, steady pulse of proof. I listened to nothing. I kept my son's pace with the stroller. I let the city pass. The world was normal and it was not. I would decide then, and in the hours to come, which I would choose. The rattling theatrics of public fury or the cold surgical exposure that leaves no room for lies to wiggle away. I chose quiet first. Evidence, facts. The kind of things that don't roar in the moment but echo later. Plans, not punches. Short sentence, a promise. My kitchen was a small, honest room that had never pretended to be anything else. The island had a coffee ring shaped like a question mark. The calendar on the wall still had last month's sticker from our son's school play, the one where he'd insisted on wearing a cape. Night flattened everything, the bright colors leaching into grays, and made the house feel like the inside of a held breath. I walked barefoot. The tile was cold under my soles, and each step made a soft domestic sound, like the house reminding me that it had always been here, waiting for me to come back into it. My son slept in the next room, and his breathing was the small, perfect metronome that had kept me steady during storms I thought I could weather. He turned once in his sleep and murmured, then settled. I stood in the dark kitchen and watched the glow from the living room spill across the paperwork on the table. Our names printed in small official fonts. The numbers that had promised freedom and also the strange weight of possibility. 50 million. Even saying it out loud felt dishonest, like trying to hold an ocean in a glass jar. The microwave hummed somewhere. Late-night popcorn, a restless husband, the tiny domestic noises that mean life goes on. The sound was banal and therefore more cutting. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, precise, indifferent to the way my chest had become a drum set of jolts and skips. I paced, slow as if the movement could uncoil the knot in my gut. My hands slid along the counter, fingertips tracing the grain of the wood, as though memorizing it would tether me to something real. When you stack up betrayal the way you stack plates, it begins with small chips that you tell yourself are nothing. A forgotten anniversary becomes a pattern. A text left unanswered becomes an architecture of omission. I saw them replaying now in quick little flashes, small scenes from the movie of our life that I had assumed had a long, safe runtime. There was the pancake breakfast the year my mother was sick. He promised he would be there. Work could wait, family first. And then the call the next morning, the apology that smelled faintly of takeout boxes and expense reports. There was the night he left the table to take a work call and returned with cologne that smelled different than the familiar bottle at our bedside. There was a holiday party where he had focused his energy on a sponsor and neglected my attempt to catch his eye from across the room. The cumulative weight of these small things lay on me like wet laundry. I had folded them, one by one, because folding was how I kept the house in order. I remember the first time I let myself name it. It was a quiet recognition, like seeing a hairline crack in a teacup you use every day and realizing it won't hold hot water the same way it once did. He has been choosing other small things over us. I whispered it into my pillow and it sounded like sacrilege. Now, in the low light of my own kitchen, the whisper grew into something with teeth. The reception desk name, the boutique receipt, the laugh in the hallway. A syllable that was not mine. They were no longer isolated incidents. They were an organized chorus. The more I let them speak, the louder their song became. I let my mind move into maps. Not the romantic kind, the practical kind. Where were the seams? Where could truth be pulled cleanly without tearing the fragile things I wanted to save? I thought of evidence the way some people think of recipes, measurements, steps, a method that, if followed, would yield a result you could verify. Facts, dates, names, receipts, voices on recordings that could not be dismissed as mood or memory. My chest felt like it had been hollowed out and replaced with a bell. Every sound made it toll. I thought about calling someone, my sister, my best friend, but my voice on the phone would tremble and they would promise to be there, and then life would rearrange the words into excuses. I did not want sympathy that dissolved with time. I wanted certainty. Grief is an odd companion to anger. They sat in the same chair in my kitchen as I went through the motions. Grief was the cold that touched my fingers when I picked up the $50 million documents, a sharp, luminescent pain like frost on leaves. Anger was hotter, quick, and clean. It rose in brief, furious waves that left my throat raw, and threaded through both was a steady, quiet fear. Fear for my son, for the shape of our life, for the ease with which a private life could be redrawn by omission and secret laughter. Memories shuffled through me, short and keen as thumbtacks. The way he used to leave Post-it notes on the bathroom mirror, little love notes that now felt staged in retrospect. The way he once held my hand in a crowded theater and squeezed till my fingers fell asleep. The small domestic kindnesses that had been used like props. Each memory was a paradox, proof of what was once real and evidence of what could be rewritten. I sat at the table and opened a drawer. The inside was a tidy tangle. Receipts, old grocery lists, birthday candles that had not been used. I pulled out the ticket stub from the night we saw the old movie and laughed so hard we both cried. I held it up to the light and the paper went translucent. Why do I keep these things? A better question pushed through. Why do I forgive them? The answer was simple and human, because forgiveness felt safer, because it had been the architecture of our small life, because the idea of not forgiving felt tremulous and loud and vitriolic. But forgiveness is not a currency that cancels lies. It is a choice, and choice implies action. I walked to my son's room and stood for a long time just watching him breathe. His hair had fallen across his forehead like a feather, and the nightlight painted a soft halo on his cheek. I thought about the life I wanted for him, a life where truth was not negotiable and where he learned that promises had meaning. I thought about what watching his father be dismantled by rumor would teach him. I thought about what watching his father be dismantled by proof would teach him. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect. The sentence came out of me like a struck bell. Short, true. It hung in the air and the house answered with a small, patient hum. That was the turning point. Not a dramatic epiphany, not an oath shouted into the midnight, a clean, precise line cut through the fog of grief and placed a new aim in front of me. Respect. Not revenge for revenge's sake. Not performance. Respect. For myself. For my son. For the life I had promised him. Once the aim was set, the options arranged themselves like chess pieces across the table in front of me. I listed them quietly, aloud, as if speaking them would help me rank their weight, confront him in public, confront him in private, tear down everything in a spectacle, hire a lawyer and freeze assets, leak secrets anonymously, gather evidence and expose it at the right time in the right place. Do nothing. Walk away and start over. None of them felt clean. Most of them felt messy in ways that would cut me as well as him. I was deliberate about discarding options. The desire for theatrics, storms staged for the satisfaction of watching a guilty face crumble, was tempting. But I knew myself. The giddy rush of public humiliation would be quick and its echo would hollow me out. We had money now. Cash was not the issue. What mattered was permanence and the protection of my son's life from the collateral damage of my mistakes. So I chose method. I chose leverage shaped by truth. I chose exposure that left no room for plausible deniability. I chose the things that could be documented, the things that would stand up to a calm, rational eye. I wanted him to be stripped not by rumor but by evidence. I wanted to create a reality so clear that his options shrank to one. Tell the truth or be faced with a life reconstructed around the facts. I made a list, old habit of mine. It felt like the nearest thing to control. Gather every receipt and booking. Record conversations where consent could be reasonably given. Collect witness names. People who had seen him in those small, incriminating frames. Make copies of emails and messages. Backups. Secure storage. Talk to a lawyer about what could be done within the lines. Find out whether alarm bells could be rung quietly, with an investigator who understood how to separate gossip from fact. Plan the public moment, not as a tantrum, but as a delivery of truth. The practical part of me stepped forward then, the part that loved order and spreadsheets and the quiet assurance that comes from preparation. I thought about how to keep my son insulated. I thought about how to hold my own emotions in a place where they could not be weaponized against our custody or security. I thought about the little legalities, proof, timestamp, witnesses. I thought about a person who could find things I could not, someone who knew how to find the edges without stepping across them. I picked up the phone. My fingers hovered because picking up the phone felt like starting a map with a single step that could not be undone. I called a woman my sister had once mentioned in passing, someone practical, discreet, with a reputation for accuracy. I did not tell my sister. I did not tell anyone, not yet. I wanted to gather facts before I let my life be the subject of pity and well-meaning advice. I wanted to know what the facts would show before I painted the picture for others. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was professional and brisk. I told her in careful sentences what I had seen and heard. I explained that I needed an impartial search, someone to look where I could not look without making a scene. I asked about legality, about timelines, about discretion. I listened to her questions, probing, precise, and my own answers surprised me with their calmness. I did not beg. I did not plead. I stated conditions, privacy, clarity, evidence first. She said she could help. She asked for an initial meeting. She asked me to bring everything I had, receipts, names, dates, the recording I had made in the hallway. My throat tightened when I mentioned the recording as if the word brought with it a weight of consequences I could not yet hold. We scheduled a time. We exchanged the hours like currency. After I hung up, the kitchen felt different. The space between the island and the table seemed to have become a line across which I had shifted. I was no longer just a woman pacing in the dark. I was someone who had signed on for an operation of truth. I could feel the gears turning, my practical brain making room for logistics, my frightened heart measuring the distance between fear and action. I made another small, deliberate move. I opened my laptop and booked a one-way ticket to the city where his meetings usually took place. Not a grand gesture, a tool, a way to ensure I could be present if the timeline of discovery required me. The confirmation pinged into my email like a small, steady beat. I closed the laptop with a breath that tasted like metal. Short sentence, the world was changing. I sat at the table and wrote down the little things I could do that night. Copy the receipt into a secure folder, back up the recording to 2 drives, mark dates on the calendar, draft a line I might say to a lawyer if I had to, place a hold on any transfers that required both our signatures, just the basic moves that shielded our son and kept options open. Each item was a small victory against the trembling uncertainty. I did not sleep well that night. My body would not let the tide of adrenaline loosen into rest. But there was a strange comfort in the work. Proof, collected and cataloged, felt like armor. The rage that had burned hot and almost incandescent earlier had cooled into a clear, surgical edge. Planning, rather than performance, felt like dignity. In the dark hours, with the house breathing quietly around me and my son dreaming on the other side of the door, I understood that the path ahead would be neither clean nor painless. There would be reckonings and collateral truths, and there would be a price to pay for the kind of clarity I sought. But I also understood, deeply, utterly, that living half a truth for the sake of comfort would be the poorer bargain. I folded a receipt into an envelope, labeled it like a small evidence bag, and slid it into the top drawer of the kitchen, a temporary hiding place until the investigator could collect it. I turned the kitchen light off. The room sighed into dark. I stood in the doorway for a moment longer and listened to the house settle around me, listening for the sound of my own pulse slowing. Then I walked to my son's room and kissed his forehead. He smelled of sleep and safety and something ferociously ordinary. I said nothing aloud. I had nothing to promise him yet except that I would do whatever I had to do to make the truth visible and to keep him safe while it unfolded. Outside, a plane would carry me to a city 2 hours away in less than 24 hours. A woman I had never met would come to my house in 2 days with a professional detachment that bordered on kindness. I had a recording in my pocket and receipts in a drawer. I had a list and a plan, and a promise to myself that I would not be the silent, folded person I had once been. Short sentence, I was ready. The plan began like most storms, slow, quiet, and precise. I sat at the kitchen table under the blue glow of my laptop, the screen a small rectangle of cold light that made the world outside look softer, like something in sepia. Rain tapped against the window in an even, patient rhythm. A mug sat beside me, the ring of old coffee on the countertop, a familiar halo of late-night work. I liked the domesticity of it. It steadied me. Strategy tastes better with a hot cup beside it. I made lists, not the angry scattershot lists I had written in the first stunned hours. These lists were methodical. Column A, evidence. Column B, witnesses. Column C, legal steps. Column D, contingencies. I wrote in neat blocks because order felt like armor and because chaos had taught me that the only defense against rumor is documentation. Evidence first. I began to catalog everything I had collected, the hallway recording, the boutique receipt, his calendar entries, the screenshot of a message he'd left open on his laptop, an email header I'd printed that suggested meetings that did not include me. I scanned documents into 2 encrypted drives and a cloud folder under a name that meant nothing, something bland enough to avoid curiosity and precise enough that I could find what I needed in an instant. The blue light reflected off the plastic of the drives like 2 tiny moons. Next, witnesses. I called the woman from reception. Her name had come to me as she had passed me in the doorway, and asked a simple favor. I told her, plain and calm, that I was trying to piece together a timeline and would she remember who she had said hello to that day. She hesitated only a beat, politeness, then sympathy, and then supplied names. They were small things, an assistant who always ran early, a client who took meetings at odd hours, a vendor who handled the charity events. Each name was another point on a map. I hired someone. I did it quietly, professional, and discreet, the way you order a service from a menu you've never used before. Her name was on a business card I kept folded in my wallet. She answered questions without melodrama. She did not promise miracles. She promised method. She told me how evidence should be preserved, how messages can be rescued from deletion if you move quickly, how witnesses can be gently asked to recall details without feeling interrogated. She spoke in terms I understood. Timelines, corroboration, redundancy. She was expensive. So what? Money was a tool, not a motive. I had it. I would use it to protect my son and to force a reckoning that could not be brushed aside. We mapped scenarios. Stage 1, keep gathering. Stage 2, set a soft trap that would reveal intent without violence. Stage 3, prepare a public option if private resolution failed. I imagined a reveal at a charity gala, his domain, the place where his reputation lived and breathed. There was elegance in using the world he polished as the stage for consequences. I imagined the hush, the clink of glasses falling into a thicker silence, the slow turn of heads. But even as I daydreamed that satisfying hush, I reminded myself of limits. I wanted proof, not performance. I wanted a truth so well presented that it could not be murmured away. My investigator began with small legal maneuvers. She wrote to the companies involved, requesting confirmation of meetings and invoices. She asked contacts whether they had noted unusual behavior. She did not break into devices. She asked. People answer when asked the right way. Sometimes they volunteer too much. She taught me to listen to what people gave freely and to treat those gifts like currency. I recorded interviews, always with consent, always with a note of the time and place. The pieces began to assemble like a mosaic. A tactic we discussed, deliberately unromantic but elegant, was social engineering in a manner that was entirely above board, a fabricated meeting invite. Not fake in the sense of fraud, but a staged public invitation to test proofs of presence. For example, an innocuous event, an industry roundtable, sent to his calendar with a clear, confirmed time where logistics would require a visible attendance or a conference call, something that would reveal whether the pattern of his behavior could be explained away by work. If he showed, it was one thing. If he canceled, another. It would be a way to watch how the narrative changed under pressure. I scripted messages. I practiced my face in the mirror, the neutral, controlled expression that exerts authority without theatrics. I rehearsed the phrases I would use with an investigator, with a lawyer, with a witness. Language mattered. The right word can make a statement into an axe or a scalpel. I chose the scalpel, precise, surgical, inevitable. And then the small pleasures of life began to fray. My friends, my real ones, called. "Are you okay?" they asked, and I heard in their voices a version of me I did not want to become. Hysterical, public, a cautionary tale. One sat with me over soup and said, "Don't let this swallow you." I nearly laughed. I won't let it swallow me, I wanted to say. I will make it cough up what it has swallowed, but I smiled and nodded and did not tell them everything. Secrets make strange allies. There were late nights. The rain kept time on the window. The glow of the laptop traced my face. My coffee turned bitter and cold, and I did not care. The investigator sent updates, a ledger here, a dinner there, a note that suggested expense reports had been adjusted, a consultant who remembered times that did not align with the official calendar. Each note made a map more clear. Each confirmation felt like a step closer to a crossing where words and proof met. Obstacles came when a siren would unexpectedly cut the quiet. My husband grew cautious. He started deleting messages with a speed that was almost theatrical. He closed accounts, citing security. He began to change habits in ways that shouted guilt. I watched as he tightened around something I could feel but not yet see fully. He put away the jacket with the boutique receipt. He began to route calls, suddenly protective of his phone like a man rearranging his chess pieces. Short sentence, he suspected. I adapted. My investigator told me, deletion is not always final. Some things can be recovered. She advised me to preserve devices and to avoid tampering with them myself. She told me to go to a lawyer about a preservation letter, a legal request that instructs companies to retain records. I called a lawyer. The voice on the other end was measured, dispassionate, the kind of voice that makes the law sound like a tool and not a weapon. He said the right words. We can request preservation. We can issue subpoenas if needed. But we should start with proof in hand, corroboration. The fewer assumptions, the better. I liked his tone. It gave me permission to be methodical instead of furious. We set traps that did not cross legal lines. We scheduled a small public meeting, nothing spectacular, at a trade roundtable I had arranged under the guise of reconnecting with industry contacts. I sent the invite to his email and a gentle reminder to others. If he went, I would have him on record. If he avoided it, I would have a pattern. It felt petty. It felt perfect. Then the first cliffhanger. The meeting was set. The guests had RSVP'd, the venue confirmed. The day before, his assistant called and said his schedule had a sudden shift. "Client emergency," she offered. "He can't make it." The voice was apologetic. My stomach dropped. My plan, carefully layered, was at risk of collapsing on the seam of a convenient emergency. I could have panicked. I did not. I breathed. I went to the contingency board, the column labeled, "If Cancelled." I plotted an alternate. If the roundtable failed, then the charity gala we had planned for a month out would be the stage. If that failed, then the investor meeting he could not avoid would be the stage. I had options because I had made them. The cancellation only proved one thing. His life had many movable parts. My task was to fix one of those parts immovably. The investigator dug deeper. A bronze-threaded lead emerged. A sponsor for the gala had a contract that required transparency about participants. A board member of a company he sat on had a calendar that seldom lied. We started threading. Names, dates, sponsors. Each contact gave a new room to breathe in. Emotion cost me. It always does. I missed the meaningless comforts of before. The way he used to bring home sushi on Tuesdays, the small, stupid jokes we made in the driveway that meant nothing to the world but everything to us. Friends looked at me with pity that stung like a light slap. I canceled plans because I couldn't bear being asked, "Are you sure?" and having to say, "Yes, I am sure." And then watch the sympathy fold into the seams of the conversation, like a moth into a sweater. Guilt arrived unpredictably. When I sent a carefully worded anonymous tip to a journalist, the sort who specialized in corporate ethics, I felt like I had stepped into a different person, one who would use public tools to pry a private lock. I worried that my son would later Google my name and find the story and learn that his mother had engineered his father's downfall. Will he think I was cruel? I asked myself in the quiet. Or will he understand that truth had to have a voice? The internal monologue played like a scratchy record. I justified each move with quiet rhetoric. This is not about pleasure. This is about closing the gap between our private life and the public ledger. I reminded myself that I was not exposing infidelity to shame for entertainment. I was aligning facts with consequence so that our son's life could be rebuilt on truth. Mid-plan, there was a small triumph. A witness, an events manager, confirmed that my husband had changed a schedule to accommodate something that did not match the official record. She sent an email, typed precisely with dates and times. When I read it, I felt a lightness, like a knot loosening. But the lightness was brief. Triumphs in these operations arrive like small gifts that must be wrapped again before use. The pivot came quietly. The more we learned, the more I realized that private proof might be defended away in boardrooms and private conversations. People with reputations have lawyers and explanations and publicists trained to smooth the rough edges. If I wanted consequences that mattered, not just a moment of shame, but an immovable consequence that would prevent him from using charm to rebuild, then I needed the exposure to be public, anchored in institutions that could not easily be swayed by charm or denial, boards, sponsors, legal filings, media holding patterns. So we tweaked the plan. Instead of a secret, small reveal designed to embarrass, we aimed for an unavoidable, documented exposure. A press-ready dossier would be assembled, evidence, witness statements, timestamps, financial traces, that could be delivered to the board of his biggest sponsor and to a journalist with a reputation for accuracy. The idea was not to broadcast melodrama, but to present a case. A court of public and corporate opinion would act as a mechanism. Sponsors would step back. Contracts would be reviewed. Bank relationships would be examined. It was cleaner, it was harder, it was vanilla. We rehearsed that delivery. We had an order, first the board, then the journalist, then a measured public statement from my lawyer if necessary. We scheduled meetings. The investigator confirmed that all evidence met basic standards. Corroboration, timestamping, redundancy. The lawyer drafted a preservation letter to ensure the accounts and messages could not be altered in the coming days. Everything felt like a machine being wound up for the moment it must move. And yet, even the best machines are subject to human improvisation. 3 days before the gala, the one that would serve as our public anchor, he announced a sudden resignation from one of his smaller boards. The public reason given: a desire to focus on family. The timing was spectacular. I felt sick. People remarked on it with sympathy. Good for him, they said. I wanted to laugh or cry. I did neither. I cataloged the motion for what it was, a repositioning. Short sentence. He was trying to move the chessboard. My investigator warned me to expect legerdemain. He had the resources to call in favors. He had allies. That was part of how he had built his life. I had resources too: truth, money, the law, witnesses. The trick was to bind those resources into a form that could not be easily rearranged by a man who knew the architecture of public relations. So we waited. We tightened our net. We added redundancy, more emails archived in multiple places, 2 witnesses prepared, a backup journalist who would publish if the lead pulled out. The rain kept tapping against the window. My laptop's light made me look like a ghost in the kitchen. I made myself small, quiet, patient. There was loneliness. It was a different, sharper loneliness than the early weeks. It was the loneliness of a person who had chosen a path that most people would not understand. Friends stopped inviting me out. People assumed I wanted spectacle. They did not know I wanted only truth. Sometimes the cost felt heavier than the benefit. I would sit in the dark and imagine a different life where the discovery had not happened, where we had made different choices and the house hummed with small, ordinary contentments. But then I would remember my son's sleeping face, the way he trusted the world implicitly, and that memory would stiffen me like a spine. And so the plan moved forward in cold, efficient increments. Paper filed, witnesses lined up, emails drafted, backups made. A public exposure, not as theater, but as a careful presentation of evidence that would not fold under pressure. It was not cruel. It was necessary. We were patient. We were ready. The machine was primed. All it needed was the exact moment to release. The gala room smelled like polished wood and expensive perfume, a curated scent meant to say success without saying anything at all. Crystal chandeliers hung like constellations, catching the light in small, precise explosions. A string quartet played near the stage, each note folding into the next like silk. I stood at the edge of the room with the dossier in my lap as if it were a program for the evening, my hands steady because the work that had led me here had a kind of gravity that steadied me. My son was with a friend, tucked away where he could not see the faces change. I had arranged that because this was not a performance for a child, but a reckoning for adults. People moved around me in their gowns and suits, faces I knew from charity boards, sponsors, men whose hands had shaken my husband's at awards dinners. Their conversation was the polite rustle of a world where reputations were cultivated like gardens. Glasses clicked. Someone laughed at a joke I did not hear. The room breathed with expectancy, and my own breathing felt too loud. My heart had a rhythm like a drum behind my ribs, a quiet insistence that I had to get through this with my voice intact and my evidence intact and the dignity intact that would carry me past petty spectacle into the realm where consequences live. The plan unfolded in a few small motions. The investigator had met the AV tech an hour before, a tiny, clandestine handshake passing professional instructions like a baton. The lawyer had a folder with printed timestamps and binding notes. I had a statement prepared that was factual, not performative. The slideshow would begin with the receipts and calendar entries. Then a voice, my voice recorded carefully in a studio, measured and low, would play over the speakers, placing the facts in plain sentences. Then a witness I had prepared would step forward and say what she had seen. I wanted truth to be delivered like a legal instrument, not an axe. They dimmed the lights. The quartet tapered into a single thin violin note that held like a held breath. My breath was louder than the violin. I felt the change in the room the way you feel a temperature drop. The air thinned as if the chandeliers themselves were leaning in to listen. The first slide glowed on the screen above the stage. The boutique receipt, magnified and obvious, the date clear as a bell. An audible intake like a collective inhalation rippled through the audience. Short sentence. The hush felt enormous. I watched his face as the receipt bloomed large. For a heartbeat, he looked as if he could place the paper in his hand, as if a private memory could be snatched back into the domain of intimacy. Then his smile faltered, the practiced curve of charm loosening at the corners. He shifted in his seat. A hand went to a glass, and the glass trembled just enough to make a tiny ripple across the surface. Conversation stopped in threads. Forks paused mid-air. The recorded voice began. It was my voice, calm, measured, a cadence designed to convey simple truth without theatrics. We had reasons to trust him, it said. We had a life built on ordinary promises. Each sentence was a fact. Each fact laid a plank on a bridge that led away from excuse and toward consequence. The slides changed. Calendar entries with names circled, email headers, the snippet of the conversation I'd recorded in the hallway, flattened into text for those who wanted to see the evidence without hearing the intimate sound. I had deliberately chosen both mediums, the audio that captured tone and the documents that captured data. Together, they made a pattern. A murmur rose. It was not malicious at first, more curiosity than judgment, but it spread like ink across paper and then across faces. He looked smaller somehow, reduced to the space between the chairs where he sat and the eyes around him. I felt a hot, odd clarity. This was not about triumph. This was about alignment, making what he had done line up with the world he inhabited so that that world could choose what to do with him. Then a slide opened that I had not planned to show so early, an invoice that tied a series of dinners to expense accounts. The room shifted again. Glasses tapped. The philanthropist at table 3 whispered to the woman beside him. A camera flashed at the back. I saw him breathe fast, once, twice, and then the first words that wrestled toward a defense. "You don't understand." Short, helpless, the sound of a man trying to build scaffolding under himself. He tried to stand. His voice came out as something that had tried rehearsing its way into reality but didn't manage to land. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. The syllables were thin and wrong. Faces hardened slightly, not cruel but alert, curiosity turning into assessment. The woman who sat nearest to him looked at him with something like incredulity, the expression of someone watching a congenial host begin to lose the script. A trusted witness stood up. I had given her time to prepare her statement, to steady her voice, to rehearse remembering rather than inventing. She walked onto the stage like a person crossing a threshold into accountability. She spoke, and her words were the small gravity pull that pulled the room's attention like compass to pole. "I saw him come in late to a vendor meeting," she said. "I saw them laughing in a corner that was not public." She named a date. She named a time. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. The hush deepened. At that moment, the air in my chest felt like it was expanding and releasing at once. My anger, which had burned long and bright like a furnace, softened into a tempered calm, the kind of quiet that follows a long preparation. The kind of quiet that does not need to shout because the machine it has assembled is speaking in a language everyone in that room could understand. There were small interruptions, micro cliffhangers, like the sort you plan on stage to keep attention. The projector flickered. Someone hissed, "Technical?" The lights shivered as if uncertain. For a breath, I felt a panic that tasted metallic. The AV tech, unseen, clicked and the image returned. The slight stumble gave my husband a breath he did not deserve, but he could not use it. The evidence was seated across multiple slides and in multiple hands. The temporary darkness could not make the facts disappear. He rose then, publicly, as if to reclaim narrative. His opening was a practiced line about family and mistakes, and there was a sorrow in it meant to be persuasive. "You don't know the full context," he said, voice loud enough. "It's complicated." His eyes sought allies. Mine met his once. There was a flash of pleading in them, a human thing that made the cruelty of the whole situation sharpen. You do not want cruelty, you want truth. The room wanted truth. Someone at a nearby table, an old friend of his, stood to intercede. "We've known him for years," the friend started, a hand on a shoulder that tried to anchor. The friend's voice trembled as if the ground had tilted under their feet, and they now had to find the horizon again. My investigator had anticipated this. She stepped forward with an additional layer, a printed email thread that indicated a pattern of scheduling that contradicted his explanations. The friend's shoulder relaxed into something like confusion rather than defense. He put his hand down. Short sentence. The scaffolding crumbled. As the room chewed slowly through the slides, the slow-motion detail became deliciously precise. The way his smile failed to reach his eyes, the moment his hand hovered over a wine glass and then dropped, the slight trembling in his jaw. I watched him attempt to stitch together plausible reactions. "It was business," he said. "At worst, a lapse of judgment." He said it like someone reciting a recipe. There are words that are meant to soften. This was one of them. It did not soften the room. I felt my own voice in my ear, not the recorded one, but the quiet internal voice that had driven me through months of collection, reminding me to let the evidence speak. I kept still. I let the music and the recorded facts and the human testimony weave themselves into a tapestry that did not require me to stand and hurl invective. The public moment was a conduit, not a stage for catharsis. Then, something I had not anticipated unfurled like a darker ribbon. A message pinged softly into my lawyer's phone, which he checked once, twice. He folded the screen back down, his face small in its concern. I saw him pass a quiet note to the investigator. They exchanged 2 words. The investigator exhaled, and then, with a small smile I did not like, she walked to the microphone. This microbeat set the audience to leaning forward. She spoke softly. "There is one more piece," she said. We received confirmation this afternoon of a transfer that aligns with the timeline we've presented. The words were small but precise. A murmur rippled that was not just curiosity now. It was judgment in the slow build. I watched as a sponsor at table 5 reached for his phone and began to scroll, and then another at table 7 shifted in his seat like a man finding an uncomfortable truth in his pocket. My husband's face switched quickly between despair and calculation. He realized several of the institutions that had given him the benefit of the doubt might now reassess. A board member, a man whose handshake had once been a constant in our lives, stood up, the old man's face ashen. He walked toward the stage as if propelled by a slow, reluctant gravity and then stopped short, eyes fixed on the projection. He whispered something to someone beside him and then sat down. He was no longer a friend. He was a man who had to think. Short sentence, the room recalibrated. I felt something in me untangle. The sharp, burning need to be loud and to humiliate, the juvenile part of me that wanted to spike a rival's tires, was gone. What remained was a clear, surgical satisfaction that came from seeing misalignment corrected by facts. That satisfaction was not cruel. It was necessary. It was like watching rot cut out of a tree so new growth might have a chance. As the final slides clicked through showing expense reports and corroborated timelines, the chorus of murmurs became a tidal wave. My husband stood as if pushed by unseen hands. He tried again, voice raw now. "You don't understand? This is—" Then he stopped. The words retracted like a hand from a flame. He looked at me as if pleading were a currency he could spend, and his face was suddenly the face of a man who recognized the weight of what he had done. The humiliation arrived slowly and then, all at once, the closest people to him, colleagues, small intimates, pulled back in the kind of quiet retreat that speaks louder than insults. Phones that had been warm with incoming messages began to go silent as people checked and then shelved their calls. A sponsor at table 2 stood, cleared his throat, and walked away. Later, I would hear he made a call. The social phone stopped ringing for him because the people who had once built his life saw a new ledger and recalculated their exposure. He stepped up to the microphone in a final, flailing effort to salvage shape. "Please," he said, voice cracking. "This is private. We can talk." There was defensiveness, then pleading. It was a live recording of a man shopping for sympathy in a room that now calculated risk. The words he chose sounded small next to the documentation strewn across the screen. Slow motion again. The way his hand closed. The way a friend's jaw tightened. The slight, shameful angle of a head turned away. A woman I had once admired rose with a napkin and touched his sleeve in a gesture that had once been tenderness but now read like a last-ditch performance. She whispered, "We'll get through this." Her voice was brittle. It had the sound of someone trying to repair china with tape. Then, the final, delicious sting, my unexpected twist, the one I had not banked on but which landed with the satisfying clarity of a bell. An old colleague of his, someone who had been in the room longer than most, stepped forward without a microphone and, with a small private smile I could read like a ledger, said in a voice that carried clear as a struck bell, "You know, I gave him a hand when he wanted to hide some things. I didn't think it was right then. I can't help any longer." Silence deepened into a thing you could feel in the bones. The man's admission was not dramatic. It was not a confession full of flourish. It was a small, crisp sentence that removed a scaffold he had relied upon. His face drained. He looked at the colleague as if betrayed by his own architecture. I felt the audience pivot. What had been mere gossip and suspicion turned into a chain with a visible link. He tried to speak, to salvage something, but his voice found no purchase. He stood on a tiny island of words that had no tide. People shifted in their chairs. The head of a sponsor's foundation stood and left the room, an unmistakable seal of disapproval. Phones lit up with messages. Hands began to slide into pockets, thumbs typing, messaging lawyers, calling PR. The cascade began. The aftermath in the room was immediate and merciless in its civility. Colleagues ceased casual intimacy. Invitations would be reconsidered. Next season's sponsorships would be reevaluated. I watched him become someone people now counted as a liability. A few people squeezed my hand in passing, small nods of solidarity, but mostly they watched as a man's social scaffolding came undone. Outside the room, consequences were quick to follow. Within 24 hours, I received a message from a journalist asking for confirmation of a few dates. Within 48, a law firm reached out, neutral and procedural, asking whether I had considered filing formally, whether I wanted to make an official complaint. I did not need legalese to know there would be movement. Bankers would look, sponsors would hesitate, boards would call emergency meetings. These are not violent actions. They are the quiet levers of accountability that remove privilege by removing opportunity. He tried to salvage a statement the next morning, careful, crafted, designed to placate. "I made mistakes," he said. "I'm sorry." The words slid like oil into the cracks but did not adhere. People had the documentation now. They did not need charm. The resonance of that truth had a weight that would not be balanced by a tearful apology. The final twist remained, a second layer of revelation that made the fall irreversible. An acquaintance of his, someone who had been peripheral until now, sent me a small, carefully worded email with a name attached. It was the name of another account, another ledger. The implication was simple. This was not a single misstep, but a pattern with a small but efficient system built around it. That system collapsed easily when the first hinge gave. People did not like unpredictability in their leaders. They preferred clarity. I did not take pleasure in his reaction. That would be a poor story. What I felt was a quiet release, like a hand unclenching. The fury had been a fuel I needed to move. The release that followed felt like a bell finally ceasing to toll. My mouth tasted like coffee and the copper tang of adrenaline. I let the sound of the room wash over me, the residual rustle, the clink of an unnoticed glass, the shuffle of someone making a call. He left that night with his coat folded around him like a shield and his phone in his pocket gone cold. The next morning, his assistant texted to say that meetings had been postponed. His inbox filled with tentative messages. Sponsors made quiet inquiries. His phone stopped ringing with the familiar, easy calls of men who had once smiled at him in corridors. The life he'd woven from charm and cultivated presence had been unstitched by evidence and testimony and by the simple, terrible arithmetic of consequence. Slow motion. The final picture I hold is of him looking at me across a room he used to own, a man who found his narrative removed from his hands. He opened his mouth once, a last attempt at entreaty. Words failed him. He was left speechless before the people who had once been his audience. Short sentence. It was over in the way that clean endings are over. The room would later be described in emails and whispers as the night reputations shifted. For me, it was an instrument of truth. It had been necessary, and that necessity sat on my shoulders like a small, serious crown. I left with evidence intact, with a record of the moment, and with a stillness in my chest like a held breath that had been allowed, finally, to loosen. The house was quiet when I returned. The echoes of the gala still hummed faintly in my mind, a slow vibration like aftershocks of an earthquake. I placed the dossier on the counter and ran my fingers over the edges. Paper, evidence, truth, all laid out and unmovable. Relief settled over me like a soft blanket, but beneath it was an unexpected undercurrent of loneliness. The room felt larger without the hum of others, and for a moment I realized how much I had carried alone. Justice didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like truth, finally having a voice. That voice had been mine, careful and deliberate, not screaming but persistent. I had built a bridge from betrayal to consequence, and standing on the other side, I felt the weight of clarity, the quiet dignity that comes from knowing you acted with integrity. No one could rewrite the timeline. No one could erase the facts, and that certainty was a comfort no amount of money could have bought. I peeked into my son's room. He was asleep, peaceful and unburdened, unaware of the machinations that had surrounded him. I kissed his forehead softly, feeling the ordinary warmth of a parent's love. I did not gloat. I did not whisper triumphs. I simply felt the relief of knowing he was safe, that his life would continue untainted by duplicity, and that I had preserved my own sense of self in the process. The lessons were clear. Respect is non-negotiable. Truth matters more than appearances, and sometimes the quiet, methodical pursuit of justice is the most powerful statement one can make. I had chosen carefully, acted deliberately, and witnessed the consequences unfold in a way that left no ambiguity. If this revenge saga gave you that rush of justice, smash like, subscribe for more epic tales, and share your revenge story in the comments. Click the next video box for another one. And as for the next story, imagine a trusted friend turning out to be a master manipulator. Betrayal, closer than you think. Short sentence. Truth has its day.